Good afternoon, and welcome to the 2009 Hoffman Scholars Talk. My name is Claire Brown, class of 1994, and I'm the chair of the Alumni Council's Committee on Academic Programs for Alumni, also known as CAPA. The Hoffman Scholars Program was created by CAPA as a new annual distinction and event designed to highlight the scholarly work of late-stage Princeton graduate students who have distinguished themselves with original work of the highest quality, and to share this work with the entire community of Princeton alumni, students, and friends. This distinction has been named in honor of Robert Hoffman, graduate class of '58, a dedicated Princeton alumnus. Bob was regarded as one of the nicest and most thoughtful of graduates, dependable, upbeat, and always helpful. Valedictorian of Riverside High School, Bob received a bachelor's degree from Drexel University in 1957, his MSc from Princeton in 1958, and a Ph.D. from the University of Pennsylvania in 1967, all in chemical engineering. In industry, he continued his academic research in the thermodynamics of polymers. Bob was not only an officer and executive committee member of the Association of Princeton Graduate Alumni, but was also an Alumni Council executive committee member and longstanding member of and source of energy and ideas for CAPA. Although spending less time as a student at Princeton than any of his other alma maters, Tiger Hoff considered Princeton his home. He was a champion of integrating graduate students and graduate alumni more fully into the Princeton fold, and was a strong supporter of alumni education at Princeton. A proud P-Raid Marshal and a flanking Marshal, he attended some 50 Princeton events in his last decade. We are pleased to confer the distinction of Hoffman Scholar to the following students who are with us today. Daniel Bauk from the History Department and the Program in History of Science, Levi McLaughlin from the Religion Department, and Intisar Rab from Near Eastern Studies. It is my further pleasure today to introduce William B. Russell, the Arthur W. Marks Class of 19 Professor of Chemical Engineering and Dean of the Graduate School. Dean Russell has been a member of the Princeton faculty since 1974. He has a long history of service to the university in various capacities, including serving as a chair of the Department of Chemical Engineering from 1987 to 1996, and of course assuming the reins in the graduate school in August of 2002. The recipient of many awards and honors himself, including appointments to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the National Academy of Engineering, Dean Russell is the perfect person to kick off our Hoffman Scholars presentation. Dean Russell.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. In the interest of trying to say something interesting, I thought I would comment a little bit on current events. Some of you may have read a couple weeks ago the op-ed in the New York Times that was entitled, "End of the University as We Know It." This was criticizing graduate education in general, with an emphasis on the humanities. And while the article has some elements of truth in it, in many ways his description just doesn't square with my view of graduate education, and particularly the humanities at Princeton. So I thought I would give you a couple of examples where I think we don't follow or led by what he says. First of all, he says, American universities produce a product for which there is no market, i.e. candidates for teaching positions that do not exist, and develop skills for which there is diminishing demand. Certainly, the competition for academic positions even for our graduates has become increasingly competitive in past years, and seriously more so during the current fiscal crisis. On the other hand, the new administration in Washington is putting funding behind its recognition for the need of highly educated individuals to help the United States recover, and not just in the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics field. Furthermore, when I go on the road to meet graduate alumni, I frequently meet alumni from the humanities who have had very satisfying careers for themselves outside of the academy. And I'm not just talking about the two biotech CEOs who got PhDs in religion. Another statement he made was, as departments fragment, research and publication become more and more about less and less. At Princeton, even a dean who's an engineer can recognize dissertations in the humanities that are very ambitious in scope and have implications for modern life, public policy, and deeper understanding of the world around us. More often than these very narrow perspectives that he put forth, I find students who transcend disciplinary boundaries, such as Gerard Passanante in English several years ago, who reached out to Tony Grafton in history and Leonard Barkin in comp lit for his advisors. So I think we're going to hear more of this today. I think the humanities at Princeton are healthy, alive, and thriving, and I'm very happy to be the dean that has them under his purview. This is also an opportunity to honor Robert Hoffman, who I did know as an alumnus years ago before I became dean, and to hear from accomplished scholars who have their own unique talents and will further illustrate the strength of graduate education at Princeton. Thank you.
Levi McLaughlin grew up in Toronto, Canada. He was trained as a violinist from an early age, but he ended up completing a BA in Japanese Studies and an MA in East Asian Studies at the University of Toronto. Levi first lived in Japan as an undergrad when he spent a year at Sōka Gakkai University near Kobe. After he completed his master's degree, Levi spent another 6 years in Japan. He taught English to surprisingly violent middle school students in Osaka, learned about modern religion as a graduate researcher at the University of Tokyo, and worked as a researcher and translator at Kokugakuin University, one of Japan's only facilities for training Shinto priests. Throughout his time, Levi carried out field work with members of Sōka Gakkai, Japan's largest and perhaps most controversial religious group. He came to Princeton in 2004, and since then, he's been working his field research into a historical and ethnographic study of Sōka Gakkai and the lives of its adherents, with a talk entitled Ethnographic and Historical Perspectives on Sōka Gakkai, Japan's largest active religion, Levi McLaughlin.
Thank you very much. Let me just get this started. I'd also like to thank Dean Russell for his comments about Mark Taylor's irresponsible rant or op-ed in the New York Times. Those were timely. So thank you for coming today. My research is on religion in modern and contemporary Japan. Japan, I've noticed these days, is often thought of as a land of fuel-efficient automobiles, or if you have small children, the land of obnoxious cartoons. But it's also interesting to people for many other reasons. Among these, Japan is of interest for ways in which ideas and practices meet that challenge preconceived notions of East or West, and as a sort of a laboratory, sociologically speaking, and a place to see violent social transformations and ways in which they've played out in the modern era. And over the past 2 centuries, Japan has transformed from a semi-feudal country into an imperialist nation state, into the democratic post-war economic and cultural powerhouse that we know it as today. In this period, we've seen also the rise of thousands of popular social movements, and in particular, in the 20th century, the rise of religious mass movements. And this is actually somewhat paradoxical. As part of the modernization process in Japan, there's also developed a dominant rationalist outlook on religion. So for example, today in surveys carried out publicly in Japan, people respond to the question as to whether or not you have religious faith. So the question is, do you have religious faith? About 2/3 of the people in Japan will respond by saying no. A minority, however, responds with a resounding yes. And these people who say yes have built the largest religious organizations Japan has ever seen. One group in particular has risen to dominate Japan's religious landscape and to make its presence felt in many other arenas of life: politics, media, publishing, the arts, business, and others. And this is the group that I study. It is, is it okay? Coming together. It's the Sōka Gakkai, the Value Creation Study Association. Do you mind checking to see this will work? Thanks a lot. So today, the group that I study is Sōka Gakkai. has a declared, oh, you had it. There it is. Thank you. Is that okay? Can you see okay? Yeah? All right. All right. Ah, very good. So Sōka Gakkai today has a self-declared membership of 8.27 million households in Japan and about 1.5 million adherents in more than 130 countries abroad under an umbrella organization called Sōka Gakkai International, or SGI. And SGI USA is the name it goes under in the United States. This 8.27 million people, or households that is, represents a staggering 1 in 5.7 Japanese families. That's 18% of the population of Japan, which is of course wildly exaggerated. Recent research puts the actual figure at about 3% of the Japanese population, which still lets you surmise that every person in Japan is either acquainted with a member, related to a member, or is a member of Sōka Gakkai. So not only is it the largest religion, it's the largest or active organization of any kind in Japan. And no other organization has matched Sōka Gakkai's success in building a distinct, autonomous, and centrally administered group with committed members in every community, every socioeconomic level, and every sphere of vocational and civic life. Another salient feature of this explosive growth is a rather terrible reputation. If you want to make a very crude analogy, Sōka Gakkai tracks in terms of public perception, if you were to compare it to the American model, somewhere between the Moonies and the Mormons. That is to say, not terribly well received in terms of public appearance. And so one thing that has come out of this, one result of this sort of taboo reputation, is that though Sōka Gakkai is ubiquitous, there's very little recent reliable scholarship on the movement until my dissertation. So, I should point out that I'm not a member of Sōka Gakkai. My research draws on, however, several years, well, really a total of about 7 years or so, spent with non-elite members primarily, working at the base of the organization. I carried out interviews. People were kind enough to let me stay in their homes. I studied for and took the Buddhist doctrinal examination for members, and I played violin with one of 5 symphony orchestras that Sōka Gakkai has in the Tokyo area. And so one of the things I'm going to draw on that experience of doing ethnographic research and historical research to address one point in the few minutes that I have left to me today. And it's a very basic question that has largely gone unanswered, which is, why is Sōka Gakkai so big, where other groups did not grow to this extent? Well, one of the ways to address this question is to look at its history. So Sōka Gakkai, Japan's largest active religion, did not start as a religion at all. Let's see if I can do this. It was founded by a school teacher, an educator, a man named Makiguchi Tsunesaburo, and his disciple, a man named Tora Josei. They were intellectuals who were inspired by European and American educational reform, neo-Kantian philosophy, the works of John Dewey, and others of this nature. They were socially progressive, and they put together an organization called Sōka Kyoiku Gakkai, which is the Value Creation Education Study Association. This is a shot from a study session that they held in July of 1938. And as you can see, there are women, there are children. It's a very socially progressive group that appeals to a wide range of interests and people looking into social reform. In 1928, Makiguchi and Toda converted to lay activism, that is non-priest followers, of a Buddhist sect that followed the teachings of Nichiren. Nichiren was a late medieval Japanese Buddhist reformer who broke away early in his life from established temples to preach that only faith in the Lotus Sutra, which is held to be the final teachings of the historical Buddha, and practicing the chanting of the 7-syllable title of the lotus, Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, were effective means of achieving salvation. So Nichiren established himself as a model of martyrdom, of selflessly persevering against corrupt worldly authority in defense of the truth, and he has, since his time, inspired both religious clerics and lay followers to follow in his model. His strength of conviction, his triumph over adversities, single-minded belief, and lifelong attention to lay adherence have all contributed to a thriving centuries-long tradition of Nichiren-based monasticism and lay activism in Japan. Makiguchi and Toda, though the group started as this educational reform movement, by the late 30s, they had really solidified their organization into a religious group. And by the early 1940s, sorry, the late 30s, by the early 1940s, these commitments were rock solid. Makiguchi and Toda unrepentantly defended their exclusive commitment to Nichiren's teachings, giving up all other religions as false and pernicious to be done away with, and defending the Lotus Sutra. In 1940, this is during the war, this is during, Japan was overcome by militarism, by a fascist dictatorship. In 1940, there was a religious corporations law that demanded that all religious corporations enshrine talismans to the sun goddess, Amaterasu, who was the putative ancestor of the living emperor, in keeping with the norms of state Shinto, the official creed of the state. Makiguchi and Toda refused to do so. They were thrown into prison. They were some of very few people who rebelled against the government during this time. Makiguchi died of malnutrition in 1944 while in detention. In 1945, Toda emerged from prison, and by May 1946, he'd reformed the group as Sōka Gakkai, dropping kyoiku, dropping education from the title of the organization, but expanding the mandate into that of a religious mass movement with a strong pedagogical thrust. Sōka Gakkai grew under him quickly in the immediate post-war years. It appealed primarily to the working poor who were flooding into Japanese cities seeking material security, social infrastructure, and spiritual certainty. New members were attracted to meetings at homes where local leaders expounded on Nichiren's writings, on the Lotus Sutra, but also on life-affirming philosophy of value that drew on Kant, also on Henri Bergson, on Thoreau, other Western thinkers. These members were quickly organized into a sophisticated, centrally controlled corporate hierarchy that grouped adherents and their households into divisions that determined by age, gender, location, and activity. May 3rd, 1951, Toda takes the mantle of second president, and at a meeting addressing several thousand members, by this point there are about 5,000 members of Sōka Gakkai, he says to them, "Unless you achieve our new goal of 750,000 households converted to Sōka Gakkai by the time of my death, don't bother having a funeral for me, just dump my remains into Tokyo Bay." They achieved this goal 1 year before he died in 1958. And in 1958, there were 1 million members of Sōka Gakkai. Driven by ingenious organization that balanced central administrative control with locally initiated activities, centered on these uncompromising teachings, Sōka Gakkai quickly eclipsed all of the Japanese religious movements in terms of scale and intensity. This, however, this came at the expense of the favorable public image, of course, and peaceable relations with rival groups. And it was around this time that the bad reputation of Sōka Gakkai also started up. This, however, was only the beginning of Sōka Gakkai's growth. In 1960, this man took the helm. He's now honorary president of Sōka Gakkai and remains the absolute leader. May 3rd, 1960, he became third president, and he further expanded the mandate of the organization. He immediately propagated overseas and spread the international group, but he also pushed the parameters of the group past those which are commonly associated with religion. He is primarily responsible for getting Sōka Gakkai into electoral politics. In 1964, Sōka Gakkai established a political party called Komeito, or the Clean Government Party, which now serves as a member of the ruling coalition in Japan's Diet, as a very powerful policymaker. Under Ikeda also, the group moved into publishing, into arts, and other things like that. So, today, one of the things that my dissertation tries to address is new ways to look at this mass movement that move beyond what has traditionally been seen as this lay Buddhist organization in order to take account of the full measure of what it actually does. So in that regard, this is a highly simplified diagram of the organizational structure of Sōka Gakkai. Members, to be fair, this is a very, in many respects, it remains an orthodox Buddhist organization. Members chant twice daily, sections of the Lotus Sutra. They study Nichiren's writings. They maintain altars in their homes. And there are other features that look quite what we would think of as Buddhist, right? However, other things come to mind. This looks perhaps like the structure of a corporation or a military. Members meet regularly in groups called zadankai. These are study circles. It's ordinarily an academic term. And the basic unit of practice is modeled on academic study. The political party remains a central focus of members. Members consider electioneering for cometo candidates as a religious practice, as part of their religious, regular religious regimen. The media empire focused on the daily newspaper Seikyo Shimbun, spreads news about the organization and serves as a text for members to learn from. The 5.5 million subscription it makes it Japan's third largest newspaper, which is amazing if you consider that it's not for sale at any newsstand. You have to buy it directly from members. There's a private school system from kindergarten up to Sōka University outside of Tokyo, and more recently, Sōka University of America. It's a liberal arts college in Orange County in California. It has museums, art galleries, many musical groups, most inspired by the music of 19th century Europe. Sōka Gakkai has its own flag. It's a tricolor inspired by the tricolor of European countries. There are anthems that members sing, Sōka Gakkai songs, mostly military marches, binding the members to the group's institutional memory. There's a thriving internal economy based on member donations. There's even a form of currency that's used in the areas around the headquarters in central Tokyo. Elite subgroups of the young men's and young women's divisions receive strict training, including how to use radios and stuff like this, to protect Sōka Gakkai territory. Sōka Gakkai is much more than a Buddhist organization. It starts to look a lot like a nation. I think of it in terms of an adjunct nation, not a nation within a nation, or some hermetically sealed entity that's seeking to separate from mainstream society, but a group that mirrors the appurtenances of the mainstream nation state. And historically, Sōka Gakkai has offered its members, many of them originally socially disenfranchised, an alternate route to national belonging. Membership in Sōka Gakkai can be conceived, therefore, as a kind of a type of citizenship. There's a plurality of opinions inside the group as to what it means to belong to Sōka Gakkai, how to put teachings into practice, but over this, there's a strong sense of one's responsibility to a mission that is greater to oneself, and also the sense that one's membership in the group is not an issue for discussion. It's taken for granted. So definitional to this nation is the role of formal education. So Sōka Gakkai training all takes place within an academic framework. The three founding presidents are known as the Shisho. It's a word meaning the master teacher. It's a term that's usually applied to a revered academic or artistic instructor. Members take doctrinal exams that lead to ranks within the organization that are labeled as academic positions, assistant professor, professor, things like that. Ikeda, the current leader, is singularly focused on academic laurels, and it's safe to say he's obsessed with juxtaposing himself to the symbols and figures who represent academic legitimacy. He's set a personal world record for the number of honorary PhDs received by any individual. It's 250 as of March of this year. Here he is in Glasgow in 1994 and University in Kyrgyzstan in March of 2008 on the right there. So at all levels, the top to bottom, Sōka Gakkai members are structured by this thoroughly scholastic framework. I'll get back to the original question I asked. Why did Sōka Gakkai grow more than other groups? I think a major reason, there are many reasons, but a major one that has been neglected mostly to date, and a key to this is in the name of the group itself, the Value Creation Study Association. It is a study association. Key to Sōka Gakkai's unprecedented growth is the fact that it presents religious practice within a modern educational framework. So this structure around study, around learning, around culture, media, publishing, the arts, made Sōka Gakkai attractive to millions of disenfranchised Japanese people who were cut out of those opportunities. People who sought to participate in these legitimate and legitimizing modes of upward social mobility. The one means of guaranteeing participation in the social elite is academic achievement, and Japan is a nation that is singularly fixated on academic achievement. Sōka Gakkai's active membership not only eclipsed that of other religions, but political parties, trade unions, all other associations, because of this distinctive appeal as a forum where adherents could realize these aspirations through the idiom of academic achievement. So Sōka Gakkai became a venue for those with no education or little education, for women, for the sick, for the socially disenfranchised, to be challenged to learn difficult Japanese Buddhist texts, modern philosophical ideas, not only for the purpose of self-cultivation, but for the purpose of teaching others, to be given responsibility themselves. So Sōka Gakkai grew fastest from the 50s to the 70s. And these are the same years as Japan's economic explosion, right? Economic miracles, it's often known as, when the country progresses from post-war devastation to economic giant. And Gakkai members also in these years realized economic success in their own lives, and most attribute it to their practice. This has led to a certain irony today. The irony is that Sōka Gakkai still appeals to its members as a means of realizing social and cultural legitimacy, even though its members have made it. It's now an organization of mostly second, third, and increasingly fourth generation members. They all have access to education. They do not suffer the social or economic disenfranchisement that was endured by the first generation in the immediate post-war era. This rigid hierarchies and types of activity that are maintained by Sōka Gakkai are increasingly at odds with this majority second and third generation membership that's socially diverse, largely unmotivated by material wants or spiritual anime, and otherwise driven by individual aspirations that aren't necessarily accommodated by the mass movement focus of the centralized group. So, essentially, Japan has changed while Sōka Gakkai has retained the practices and the ethos of its era of high growth in the 50s to the 70s. So it remains an open question as to whether Sōka Gakkai can remain relevant to a 21st century membership by appealing to the social and educational aspirations of a 20th century membership. Thank you. Thanks.
Questions?
So you focused on this rapid period of growth, and maybe my question is influenced by the fact that initially you posited sort of a Western cognate for this, but I'm wondering, during the period of growth, is there aggressive proselytizing going on? Or if there isn't, then where's the growth coming from? What's the actual mechanism providing recruits?
Thanks. There's aggressive proselytizing going on. The members from the 50s to the 60s had this handbook. It was in Japanese known as the Shakubuku Kyoten. It's the handbook of conversion that had detailed arguments against other religions. What to say to people who belong to different Buddhist sects, who are Shinto or Christian, ways to undermine their faith, to bring them in. That's just one of many tools put in the hands of members who gained a pretty terrible reputation for harassment and all kinds of other things like that. They pulled back in the 70s, and that's when the growth started to peter out. So these techniques work. as irritating as they may be, and as bad a reputation as they may garner, there's no arguing with success, right?
I was curious whether there was any controversy over the move into electoral politics within Sōka Gakkai. Were there dissenters in this decision?
It's a little difficult to know, retrospectively. There were and there remain some mostly intellectually minded members who think that was a bad move. The vast majority of members have sort of folded the electoral politics wing of Sōka Gakkai into their daily practice, especially during elections. It mostly remains the big issue for critics of the organization. There's the fears, especially emerged in the 60s when Komeito, the political party, started to rise in popularity, about a return to theocracy that was seen during the wartime era. And eventually there was a policy initiated in 1970 called the Division of Religion and Politics, whereby Sōka Gakkai and Komeito are officially separate entities. The reality, though, practical reality, is that they are almost indivisible. Most members consider it to be their constitutional right to vote for whomever they like, and that for the people who best represent them. That happens to be, of course, supporters of their religion.
I was wondering if you could comment on whether or not this adjunct nation status they developed, this whole other organization of what looks like a university or a military or a nation state, all this does that detract from the legitimacy of the organization? Because it's kind of a faded copy of what already exists now.
Yeah.
I mean, you see a similar kind of thing when you popular media, when people talk about Liberty University.
Right.
You know, a similar kind of religious movement that's making gestures towards academic legitimacy. Not in the same way, obviously.
Yeah.
That was the analog that kind of
It's not a bad analog. I mean, I think of, for example, Sōka University grads from Japan. They're comparable to, say, Brigham Young graduates in the United States. Brigham Young doesn't have a bad reputation these days as a school, and its grads end up doing pretty well. And generally, they fall all over themselves, being good citizens and being diligent workers as ambassadors for their school and therefore for their religion as well. Same thing happens with Sōka Gakkai. There's also a generational shift that's perceptible. The school opened in 1971 at a time when it was definitely an appeal to academic legitimacy, or to legitimacy through academia, really. And now it's much more routinized. It's just not, members have options, and it's just not quite what it once was. Yeah. Okay, well, I mean, it's just a heuristic device at this point. I'm not sticking to the nation idea as a fixed entity. But I'm inspired by some writings on nation. One of the earliest is Max Weber's notion of a nation as a specific cultural mission, one that can transcend the boundaries of a state, for example. And at that time, when he was writing, he was speaking, for example, about the Jewish people, for example. Similar models can be applied, I believe. The people share certain ideals, goals, practices, a sense of belonging, cultural community, things like that, across national boundaries. But there are major differences between, for example, members in the United States and members in Japan. And I'm always struck by that. The reason my dissertation, for example, focuses only on Japan is that every time I look outside of it, I don't know what I'm looking at. It's that different. So it's a work in progress in terms of how well this model is useful. But so far, it's much more useful than just saying, here's a religion, because that doesn't do justice to this wealth of practices that the group is engaged in.
Based upon the first. So again, another heuristic you used was that the members had a mission that connected just the community, sort of like something that you.
Well, it's very specific because the object is always institutional expansion. And the object will always be to convert people you know. There's no ambiguity. And so that actually is a source of strength. People's ideas, people's practices are very clear. And the answer to almost any personal problem is to invest oneself into the corporate goals of the organization. This has led to, and this is something I discuss in long episodes of my dissertation, crises among individual members, where sometimes investing yourself into the rather static corporate goals of an organization is not a way to overcome personal crises, especially sometimes if the organization itself is the cause of your problems. Thank you very much.